books hold a lot of sway in determining an artist's reputation, or at least our sense of an artist's reputation. We might think of individual writers transforming how we see certain painters or certain kinds of painting. Roger Fry's Cézanne, the many rediscoveries of Vermeer, from Le Brun to Torre Berger, or the Goncourt brothers rescuing the reputation of 18th century French painting, or equally Edmond Goncourt writing the first monographs on Utamaro in 1891 and Hokusai in 1896 respectively, the first books to isolate important Japanese painters from more general studies of national periods and schools. We put a lot of importance on publications. Beyond the relatively ephemeral and often fickle world of press coverage, interviews and reviews, a substantial representation in print gives a kind of lasting legitimacy. And it's not just about what you say, or that you say it at all. It's also how you say it. Design and physicality are rarely talked about, but are hidden weapons in the arsenal of critical rehabilitation. But with pre-Echo Press's publication of Miyoko Ito, Heart of Hearts, shots have definitely been fired. Neither a conventional monograph collecting various historical or critical essays, nor a catalogue raison, Heart of Hearts is a hefty gift box for painting fans, designed to introduce, but not to explain. It's an old-school telephone directory with small ads placed for future consideration. Aside from the high-quality reproductions of the paintings themselves, the book gives us two main sources of contextual information: a relatively brief biography by curator Jordan Stein, which also smuggles in some nuggets of interpretation, and an interview with the artist from 1978. Really, it's all we need. Ito was born in the US in 1918, but moved to Japan to receive a traditional education at the age of 5 in 1923. The family arrived the day after the Great Kanto earthquake. The upheaval of moving to a strange country caused Ito to have something like a nervous breakdown, resulting in a long period of illness and confinement. Returning to the US 5 years later, she studied at Berkeley, but was interred at the Tanforan Assembly Center for Japanese Americans under Executive Order 9066 before her graduation in 1942. She was later transferred to the Topaz concentration camp in Utah before being released in 1943. Without getting into amateur psychoanalysis, these experiences may partially explain the general shape and mood of the pictures. Two periods of upheaval and confinement, seen mostly through rooms and windows. One experience tucked and folded into the other. One particularly striking passage in Stein's essay links the visible tacks on many of Ito's canvases to the exposed nails on the walls and floors of the converted horse stalls, which were used as accommodation at Tanforan, as recalled in former prisoner Mine Okubo's graphic memoir, Citizen 13660. But the text never gets carried away with this kind of analysis. Stein is quick to quote a local Chicago framer who recalled Ito casually telling him to go ahead and pound them in. Which is not the same as saying they have no formal value, or no effect on the viewer, of course. John Yao is quoted in the text speculating on ideas of value and expediency, a certain peripatetic, uprooted quality to them, while Stein persuasively describes themes of tension and release, halo and fetish, kink and utility, a set of opposing values which are consistent with the paintings themselves. As Stein reiterates, Ito was open to the suggestion of friends and observers, once remarking that she only realised the importance of Heian period art and culture on her work when it was pointed out to her by the key Chicago painter and educator, Rei Yoshida. So perhaps we can assume some degree of freedom in seeing influence or equivalence in her work. For one thing, Ito found the work of Pierre Bonnard particularly revelatory, and the parallels are clear. But in their mood and tonality, not to mention their tightness of design and surface, the paintings can strangely seem a lot closer to Balthus. A deeply weird painter who would probably get this video demonetized or removed entirely should we venture into him fully. Balthus was nevertheless uniquely gifted and inventive in articulating the experience of childhood's long afternoon into adolescence. He captures both a sense of fantasy and a hazy but very specific time of day, what Ito referred to in the work of Giorgio Morandi as the feeling of 5 o'clock moving into 5:30. There's also a sense of sick room delirium with Balthus, which is only amplified in Ito's pictures. A restless world of table legs and upturned chairs, mirrors and fish bowls. A world where figures turn into furniture, and pieces of furniture turn into figures. But Ito goes much more into internal mental space. 9048 looks like a diagram of a sleepless night, where the headboard is always too close but the gap between the frame and the mattress is always too wide. Many of her mid-period works recall episodes of delirium in illness, particularly childhood illness, when fixations on shapes and colours bordering the edge of sensibility can seem to occupy the largest portion of the brain, and tactile sensations of the immediate environment are in turn greatly magnified and distorted, the lines between internal and external awareness melting away. With their slightly sour gradients, they can also recall ice lollies given to cool down a fever. Sometimes even recalling jelly moulds, the foods of childhood illness with their soft, unstable forms. Or in more stable terms, skylights and doors seen from a bed, again suggesting periods of rest and recovery. Windows opened for air. Because we shouldn't get too caught up in talk of sickness and delirium, they are equally about touch and delight, about the warmth of sunlight, the feeling of polished wood and crisp paper, sand and water, skin and hair. Sometimes impossibly, all at once. The films of Yasujiro Ozu are partly famous for their trademark shots of not much happening, moments of stillness or small events that apparently add nothing to the narrative. And although clearly otherworldly, we get the sense that Ito's pictures are always tethered to a similar kind of lived experience. Moments of stillness, punctuated by the ineffable. She once said of Paul Klee, an artist she greatly admired, "He is cosmic-oriented. I am earthbound." Just as we sense the mystery of the universe behind Ozu's landscapes, interiors, and still lives, his everyday places, tasks, and rituals, we also sense the texture of everyday places, tasks, and rituals behind Ito's elusive abstraction. We might say they work towards similar ends, from opposite directions. Ozu is also known for his so-called tatami shots, shots with an unusually low camera height by Western cinema conventions, as if seen from the traditional tatami mat. A slightly distancing, off-kilter viewpoint, which Ito also implies. And while the question of what kind of relationship she had with Japan or Japanese culture still remains unclear, at least as far as Heart of Hearts is concerned, in her approach to staging and screening, symmetry and asymmetry, dividing and portioning the frame, it appears she absorbed some deep sense of Japanese philosophies of composition, perhaps even of life, which, in painterly terms, amounts to much the same thing. The inside-outside ambiguities of Fukinuki Yatai painting, literally blown-off roof painting, seem particularly relevant to her mid-period works. It's as if she's realigned the exploded perspectives of the genre, but mixed up the order of the semi-transparent layers which now intrude on one another, both creating and refusing to cohere into a new space. Speaking, as always, of the porous nature of inner and outer worlds, certainly we shouldn't fixate on the semi-recognisable interior furnishings. As Ito said herself, furniture never stays furniture. It turns into landscape, or into some kind of action. Just like this stunning passage in Balthus' The Living Room of 1942. In Ito's Heart of Hearts, Basking, what could be the pages of a book, or a score on a music stand, can become the view of the sea. Towards the later 70s and into the 80s, the dressing table and mirror-like forms invert and balloon outward. The spaces become larger in scale. Curtains and stages with oceanic backdrops are suggested. The doll theatre of the earlier picture, Kachina, becomes more like an amphitheatre, the space distinctly open air. At this point, the work takes a more theatrical turn. The deconstructed, stage-set sailboats of Iliad and Odyssey, referencing classical drama and epic poetry, for example. They start to look like incomplete animation cell setups. Circles and wedges resemble the hinges and joints of puppet theatre. The disguise, moustache and crab pincer shapes in centre stage recall Prunella Clough's shadow play etchings of the 1990s, which explore a similar territory of form and space. And actually, Clough is another artist Ito can occasionally sail close to from the late 60s onwards. A period over which, much like Ito, she'd reach a point of maximum freedom and elusiveness in her abstraction. In some ways, Clough was almost an unknowing British counterpart to the heterogeneous group of artists in the Chicago scene which Ito inevitably became associated with. And in other ways, she's just as alien to them. Many common pictorial strategies would cross-pollinate across the rosebed of Chicago art, particularly among the younger generation of artists taught by Rei Yoshida. They were guided by a half-mystical, half-taxonomical fascination for detritus and garbage, a dogged pursuit of the poetic or associative potential in decorative, discarded, or unexplored forms. Strategies which Clough would independently pursue in her own idiosyncratic way on the other side of the Atlantic. Seeing the Duchampian rainbow in a plastic broom in her 1989 painting Household Goods, for example. Clough is instructive though, as her work is more active in its surface, in its painterly qualities, for all that it shares many concerns with the Chicago scene. Just as Ito is more various than most of her contemporaries, with a much wider range in terms of pictorial energy and effect, a much wider reach of metaphor and meaning. Ito was a close friend of key Chicago painter Sarah Canwright, who she would later speak of in glowing terms, and while there can be some shared aspects between the two, marshmallowy tones, knotted rope, or sash forms, Ito can just as easily swing closer to the saturation and sheen, the nested spaces and gradations of Evelyn Statzinger, with pictures set to every increment in between. The 1970 painting Oracle in particular shares the leaf or tongue shapes of Statzinger's surrealist abstract assemblage phase, but it exists on an entirely different, hypnotic, painterly level, completely transcending its roots in post-cubist surrealist abstraction. None of these artists come that close to Ito's highly specific palette, composition, and surface. And despite being shown with the Chicago Imagists, she went beyond the scope of most of them, making work of both deeper strangeness and greater authority. The insightful visual comparison with Philip Hansen in art and architecture critic Franz Schulz's 1972 book, Fantastic Images Chicago Art since 1945 shows just how near and yet how far Ito sailed to the Chicago wind. As this great photograph implies, there's often a form of self-portraiture at play in Ito's paintings. Most obviously in the recurring canopy and curtain devices which imitate her distinctive long hair and fringe, her iconographic silhouette, so to speak. But it's also there in the way her workspace creeps into the compositions, as if herself and studio were one and the same. Recurring structural devices can recall the masts and painting trays of easels, handles and winches, light switches, the crossbars of the stretcher. Even fanned paint stains on the walls seem to edge their way in. These self-referential qualities perhaps speak of a certain neurosis of production, of a form of self-investigation spiralling inward and outward at the same time. Compulsive and almost therapeutic in her painting, she was nevertheless highly self-critical, working on drawings for weeks till she was sufficiently satisfied to start her painting. Recalling something she said about Morandi, that she admired him for years but found him hard to look at en masse, she also dismissed many of her pictures as merely serial work, with a standout only occurring every so often. But this is to do herself a disservice. So many pictures see her testing and pushing small variations, tipping the verticals and diagonals in new slants, squeezing and stretching the curves, making incremental shifts and adjustments to see what happens. Changes in visual tempo and frequency, energy and relaxation, saturation and intensity. But as much as the paintings are about incremental shifts, the way they are organised in the book, there's often the sense of a huge jump between one and the next. The more you become attuned to Ito, the more the pictures' absolute specificity and difference from one another reaffirm themselves. It's one of the things the book illustrates so brilliantly in its size and sequencing. In fact, so engrossing is the sequencing that it seems practically inexhaustible. Flipping from page to page or skipping from one to another in endless permutations, it's a rich experience. In anything more than small portions or skimmed chunks, it's as potentially overstuffing as Richard Wright's haikus, or the poetry of Rosemary Waldrop, or Emily Dickinson. But a shape also emerges over time. An arc of development is described. Each painting represents a moment of continuity and departure, an inversion and redistribution of recurring pictorial ideas. Pictorial ideas which would drive a critic or curator to distraction in unpicking their complex interweaving over the decades. Towards the end of her life, the forms become ever more curvilinear, the structures and spaces more undone. The late works tie the knot with the early ones, meaning that although she died relatively young, her life's work has at least some sense of completeness. This doesn't leave her hermetically sealed off from the world, though. Time and attention will only make clearer the threads she left hanging for future artists. A starting point might be the contemporary painter Thomas Abts, perhaps the working artist closest to Ito in the deceptive variousness and range of abstraction she can maintain while seeming to stick within a narrow field. Not that Heart of Hearts wants to get into questions of influence and relevance. That will come later for Ito. Likewise, something the book can't really go into, but we definitely can here, is the relationship between Ito's work and that of contemporary painter Matt Connors. Heart of Hearts is published by Connors pre-Echo Press, an imprint apparently dictated by little more than the artist's whims and interests, and all the better for it. For example, Clarice Cliff Shards. Connors first saw Ito's work in person at the game-changing 2018 Artist Space show curated by Jordan Stein, along with the Berkeley iteration of the exhibition, her first institutional showing in some 40 years. And yet the parallels in their paintings speak of the deep connection people can have with artists they've never even heard of, encountering their spiritual counterparts in a moment of electric recognition. But the book doesn't labour any points of contemporary relevance with Ito. It doesn't fall into the trap that The Making of Husbands did with fellow Chicagoan Christina Ramberg. We aren't hammered over the head with references to contemporary artists or theory at this relatively early stage in her introduction to a wider audience. At the same time, Heart of Hearts never feels consigned to the past. It exists in the here and now, the work beamed directly into the present. Though of course Ito is also eminently 1970s, almost to a self-conscious degree, with a complex sense of everything from Egyptological Afrofuturism to 1970s Art Deco revivalism in design and culture folded into the picture's complex temporal character. Time-saturated and timeless as the paintings are, the cleanliness of the book's design also does a lot of good work in letting them feel fresh. With no disrespect to Stein's great and much-needed essay, the reproductions are the main event. It's as much a photography project as anything, a record of what was clearly a team effort in tracking down, documenting and dating a scattered body of work which has mostly remained a cherished part of people's homes or languished in public collections. Behind the book's elegant simplicity is what must have been an all-consuming period of hectic activity out in the wild, which, in keeping with the general approach of humble dedication, is only really visible if you go looking elsewhere, or if you followed the project's progress on social media. In recent years, there's been an increasing movement toward minimal text and maximal reproduction in art publications. The step away from text-riddled books stresses all sorts of things, not least of which is the ability for work to stand on its own and to open itself to a plethora of individual readings, to offer a repository of images rather than a collection of observations. These aren't the only books we need on painters, but they are important books, especially for underappreciated ones. Heart of Hearts shows what you need and what you don't. It's a fully comprehensive starter kit, not only for anyone interested in Ito, but for anyone considering reconstituting or relaunching the work of any artist, long after they've been lost to time, apathy, or misunderstanding. It's not just the kind of thing artists and curators with the time and means could be doing. It's what they should be doing.